I think that, one of the many advantages of death occurring over a long period of time, in the case of my husband and with many people who have cancer or other chronic illnesses, is that you do have time to meet a lot of other people who are going through similar situations. And one of the great delights of our life actually was sitting around in labs, waiting for the results of tests and talking to other people who were waiting to find out, whether their cancer numbers were going in the right direction or not. And I think it's very aware of, just the acute pain and anxiety that people do go through. What I had not been aware of, and what I was very interested in writing about, was how extraordinary grief is. I mean, people talk about grief as if it's kind of an unremittingly awful thing, and it is. It's painful, but it's a very, very interesting sort of thing to go through, and it really helps you out at the end of the day. It gets you through, because you have to reform your relationship and you have to figure out a way of getting to the future. And grief does that. And I was interested in the difference between that and depression, because I had gone through depression and I thought that I might well get depressed again after Richard's death, and I didn't. And the similarities were interesting, but the differences were, to me, far more interesting. I think, first of all, I think most people do in a funny sort of way. I think one of the things that you're not prepared for, I was not prepared for, was how exhausting it is to be the person. I was the only person who took care of my husband, and I loved being able to spend time with him and so forth, but it was tiring, and I'm like a high voltage, high energy person, and it was exhausting, and I think that's a really unfortunate side of that. But we counted ourselves blessed to have the time together. Actually, I mean, when you look at people who lose someone through a heart attack or suicide or an accident, and they haven't the time to spend, we were very blessed in that respect. And I don't think either of us ever took that for granted. And also, we both were really busy, and Richard in particular was a well-known scientist and was always going off to meetings and giving papers and so forth, and we both were zipping around like, crazed weasels. And at some point we just couldn't and didn't and wouldn't do that anymore, and as a result we had just a lot of time to sit around and read together and talk and go out to movies and be with friends. It's not like he was sick all the time, and just gradually make kind of incremental changes in how he was able to get around. But it was for the most part delightful. We actually had fun. You don't lose the person. That's not true for people who have dementing illnesses or people who progressively really get so weak. But in our case, we were lucky he was able to enjoy life actually until very near the end. I think we both knew that it wasn't going to be very long before he died. I mean, that was clear from all the scans and his general deteriorating health. But we didn't have a sense that it was going to be that soon. And we did. We had a wonderful last day. We had a room where we just sat and read, and he was very dyslexic, and so I used to read to him, and we just did. We talked, and we had very meaningful talk about he was a scientist, and he was concerned about how he would never understand the science of the disease schizophrenia that he had studied all of his life, that he would never know what caused it. He would never know the treatments that came out for it. He'd never know the genetics of it. And this was, for a scientist who's very curious, very painful for him, and it was as close to seeing him very upset about things as I'd seen him. And yet, after talking about it and so forth, and talking about the nature of science and medicine, somehow it came back to being his usual, actually quite optimistic self. And it was a wonderful time we had. Yeah, I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world.